My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened Here Recently. Jason, I wanted to take this opportunity to highlight a new game runner that our community has. Josh is running a campaign of Pirate World for the Gauntlet. He started it out here locally in town. He lives in the same town that I do. And we were just playing with some friends, and he's played other games with the Gauntlet. And so after getting some of the kinks worked out, he decided that he was ready to run it on a bigger platform for some new people. And I'm in it, and it's pretty fun. He's using a source book. He's using a bunch of source books, if I'm being honest, but primarily he's using one called just Pirates, a Dungeon World source book, and it's by Street Rat Games. I have only, perused it, so I won't go into, a really in-depth review of it. But I'm telling you, Dungeon World's pretty fun when you're all playing kind of low fantasy pirates.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that supplement. I know of Pirate World. Is that different?
Yeah, this is something else entirely. I think that he has Pirate World and has looked over it, but really it's like Dungeon Planet. You know, you're still basically playing Dungeon World, just with slightly different playbooks, and then there's additional moves for your ships, and things like that.
This is Pirate World we're talking about, or Pirates?
This is Pirates, and what we're playing. So it's very, very much homebrewed and a mixture of all of these different sources. So I can't speak to if you get Pirates, this will be the experience that you'll have, but it's got some different playbooks. It's got a swashbuckler playbook, which is kind of like a dexterity-based fighter, but they have some different moves that make them better at kind of defensive things and being less armored. Just kind of fit the setting a bit more. And then you replace bows and arrows with muskets, and Josh has done a good job of kind of curating his playbook selection to keep it fairly, mundane for the most part. It's a lot like Pirates of the Caribbean level of magic and not regular swords and sorcery kind of magic.
I think that's really smart. I think one of the best things you can do as a GM in any Powered by the Apocalypse game, and even in Dungeon World, is to be very, very careful about the playbooks you make available. I think the playbooks you make available have a big impact on the flavor and tone of the game. For example, I pretty much have just discarded Druid at this point. I haven't had Druid in my games in forever because I don't like what Druid does to the story.
Interestingly enough, we do have a druid. That is the only magic user that he is allowed in. And it's kind of fun. They're oceanic. So, and they're trying to hide it from everyone else. So no one knows that they can turn into sharks and things like that. They sneak away in the middle of the battle or whatever.
So they're not like the superhero druid, that most people play it as, right?
No.
This is seemingly, I don't know, to me, the druid on screen, if you're not careful with it, can seem so overpowered versus everybody else.
It can definitely stray that way, but that has not been the case thus far. It's been really fun. I've got to play with some new people. Another thing that Josh has done that I think was really good, is a lot of these pirate style texts will kind of get to the nitty gritty of your crew and how many of them there are and how your crew is doing versus the other crew and trying to keep track of all that. And he has really abstracted that, which I think is a smart move and what Dungeon World would encourage you to do. So, if listeners do end up wanting to play that, be aware that that is a thing and, in these source books and, maybe think about abstracting it because it's going to help.
Yeah, I think it depends on what your goals are, right? I mean, I know, there are more traditional fantasy gamers who love stuff like that, right? And I'm not going to knock it. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, what we preach on this show and what I think Dungeon World wants to be doing generally is to abstract that a little bit, or at least show those details in a different way, right? You can, more traditional fantasy games handle they abstract the idea of having two large crews of ships with numbers, right? They use numbers to abstract it, right? I think in Dungeon World, we use it more as fictional positioning, right? That's kind of how we handle it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He's doing a good job with the fronts. I think, like, it seems like there is, like, a major front is just what would be terrifying to sailors on the open sea is a storm. I mean, that's one of his fronts. And whether or not it is influenced more by something bigger than, just a mundane storm or not is not clear. But it doesn't matter, because either way, it's like, this is a really dangerous thing for people who are going to be sailing out there.
I like that. It has a sort of like real world mundaneness that's very appealing. And listeners, when we say mundane in this context, we mean non-magical, basically, right? We don't mean like boring.
Right.
No, I love that. I think that's great. I mean, because I will tell you, I used to be a sailor. I will tell you that is the thing you worry about the most when you're on the sea.
Yeah. So that's really all I wanted to share about it. I'm sure there'll be more in the future, but right now, it's a great time of swinging on ropes with swords.
Awesome.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Should I Be on the Lookout For? Listeners, I think we had a couple of shorter kind of materials you could use if you are looking to start a new adventure, either for a one-shot or for a longer kind of campaign. These are a little bit older. They've been around a bit longer, I think since 2015 for both of them. And I think that they are good at what they look like they're supposed to do. One creates a one-shot, and that's called the Adventure Builder by John Lewis. And the other, I think, would be good for creating a mini-campaign, and it is called Discern Realities, and it is by Dirk Leichte.
Yeah, I had a chance to look at these a long time ago when they were first published, and I looked at them again in preparation for this show, and I like it. I will tell you, well, so maybe we should talk about each of them just a little bit individually before we give our overall thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Let's start with the Adventure Builder by John Lewis. So this is a post on RPGalchemy.com, and he explains John explains that he goes to conventions a lot and likes to run Dungeon World because it's so good to run as a one-shot, and it's so easy for people to grasp and get in the right headspace. And so he just has a few decisions that you have to make so that you can run an adventure, and he sets them out in nice kind of list formats. But it's like two basic paths for a one-shot. And one of the paths is, we are exploring blank that lies in blank, seeking the blank. Or the other is, we are here to blank, guarded by blank and blank. And then he has things that you could use to fill that in.
Why don't we just do a quick example, picking things from the list so people have a good sense of what this looks like?
Yeah, we'll just pick randomly and see how that goes. So we are exploring an overgrown necropolis that lies high in the mountains, seeking the lair of a legendary beast. So that's one.
Yeah, I like that. It's very immediate. I think I'm imagining in a convention scenario, which, like you said, I think is what he intended this to be used for. A convention one shot where you still want to give the players a sense of Dungeon World's collaborative nature, but you may not have time to do the full world creation stuff like you would do in a normal game of Dungeon World, or whatever other method you're doing. So I kind of like this because it's going to depend on you're going to have to be a pretty good improv GM, right? But to actually kick things off after getting these little elements from the players. But I like it in concept for sure. I mean, I like the idea of, if nothing else, it presents to the players at the table who at a convention may have never played Dungeon World before. It presents them with the idea of, hey, you're responsible also for creating the world.
Right. The post has additional advice on things like that. Like he says, he'll give that overarching thing, and then he'll stop and let them create their characters, and there'll be table talk about what they think is going on, and he'll kind of be taking notes, about things that it sounds like they're expecting, and then he might, twist that or whatever. But it's a good little article on how to run a good one-shot, especially for people who may or not have played this before.
Okay, so the other thing we're looking at today is a one-sheet starter formula, I guess, by Dirk Leichte called Discern Realities. Dirk Leichte, you may know that name, listeners, because Dirk was responsible in the early days of our zine codex. He was responsible for doing a lot of the artwork, and we've also covered some of his stuff on this show before in this segment. So this one sheet is pretty neat. It's pretty similar to what we just described, the adventure builder that we just talked about, but it's a little more I think it's like a little more in depth, and it's definitely like aimed more for like slightly longer term play. The results seem a little more similar to the classic sort of Dungeon World starters that we've talked about forever on this show, that were originally popularized by Marshall Miller. So this is how it goes. As you might have intuited, he just has each of the Discern Realities questions listed on the sheet, and underneath each question, there are a series of prompts that you pick from, and you use that to build out your adventure. So for example, I'm just going to run through it and pick one from each, just so you have a sense of what this might look like. What happened here recently? A devastating plague. What is about to happen? An invading army is camped at our border. What should I be on the lookout for? A landscape littered with arcane traps. What here is useful or valuable to me? A holy relic in a faraway tomb. Who's really in control here? A populace bent on rebellion. What here is not what it appears to be? The return of someone presumed dead. So as you can see, this is it's not quite as immediate as the adventure builder that David discussed. It's not like we are here in this mountain dungeon thing to do a thing. It's more about the world, right?
Yeah, like based on those choices, I can immediately see like 3 fronts that would naturally emerge from that, as separate kind of problems that the players would have to be battling back, or else like they would be overrun by one, and that would launch into, a 3 or 4 part campaign. No problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like both of these. I will say that, in Codex, we do the adventure starter stuff. We publish lots of those. That Marshall Miller adventure starter style. Those are a little bit misnamed because even though theoretically they are to get your adventure started, they're actually quite detailed, and they contain lots of information that continues to be relevant throughout the campaign, and it continues to be a resource that you can use throughout the campaign. So it's kind of weird that they're called adventure starters because they're really a lot more than that. These 2 things are proper starters, right? Like these are, I have nothing and I'm sitting down trying to create something out of nothing.
Yeah. I think they're both really valuable tools. I'm glad that I got a chance to look at them again. It'd been a while, and I realized we hadn't discussed them on the show. There might be something that listeners weren't aware of, and it's definitely a great tool. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be.
Today we're talking about the special move called Bolster. A move that I suspect probably doesn't get used very often. Maybe it's just in the Gauntlet, I'm not sure. But we're going to talk about Bolster. And here's what inspired me here. On our Gauntlet Slack, I was watching a conversation take place one day. I didn't chime in, but I was watching a conversation take place about how to make Dungeon World a little bit more like Blades in the Dark, which is to say how to run Dungeon World more as a mission-oriented heist situation, or just a mission-oriented kind of game. And what the conversants were talking about was this idea of how Blades uses flashbacks to show characters planning for the job, and how you can mechanically incorporate the idea of flashbacks and things like that to get a similar sort of highly competent mission-oriented feel in Dungeon World. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah. I definitely understand where they're coming from with that. Having played Blades in the Dark a little bit, it is very convenient to be able to do those kinds of things.
Well, it gives you a different feel, right? It's just a different kind of feel. Normal Dungeon World, a dungeon crawl, I think the assumption is maybe you're prepared in the sense that you have your adventuring pack and your 10-foot pole and your bottle of oil and all that, but you don't really you can't plan for what's in the dungeon, right? So I think what folks were talking about was this idea of running more mission-oriented types of adventures in Dungeon World, where you're able to actually plan for a mission a little bit better. Another reason why this was kind of sticking in my mind right now is that I'm going to be running a brand new campaign that we mentioned last week called Songs of the Shadow Court. And in that one, I'm going for more of that flavor, right? It's much more of a competent operator type adventure. And so I've been thinking about stuff like this. And it occurred to me that Dungeon World already has some pretty good tools in place for this. You don't even have to change the rules. First of all, adventuring gear. Adventuring gear, you decide as a player, you decide what your character brought in the moment, right? That is exactly how it works in Blades. In Blades, you choose your loadout, which is it's an abstract thing where you just say like how many X number of things you're carrying, and then you pick the items from a list as you need them, right? So adventuring gear is literally that. It's just, there's not a list of items, right? You just kind of decide on the fly. So already, there is a touch of that in Dungeon World, right? But I also want to talk about the bolster move, because I think the bolster move used properly can give you a lot of that flavor.
Yeah, I agree. If you'll recall, when I was running Angle Kite, between sessions or between the little mini campaign arcs, I would have returning characters have the bolster move available for whenever they needed it in the next little mini campaign, which the mini campaigns weren't exactly missions, but they were frequently city-based adventures, which is much more of a Blades of the Dark kind of thing.
Absolutely. So let's kick off by reading the move. Do you want to read the bolster move, David?
Yeah. When you spend your leisure time in study, meditation, or hard practice, you gain preparation. If you prepare for a week or more, take 1 preparation. If you prepare for a month or longer, take 3 instead. When your preparation pays off, spend 1 preparation for +1 to any roll. You can only spend 1 preparation per roll.
Pretty straightforward, right? And I like it because it represents, it's a highly abstract way of dealing with people's, downtime, essentially, right? I remember when I played old AD&D 2nd edition, we actually role played out that downtime, right? We didn't skip ahead. We actually played out that downtime, and we saw all the things they got up to. If you're not interested in doing that, and I think nowadays people are not really, this move is great for that, because it implies that they have a life, right? The characters have a life that takes place when we're not playing them, right? And this is a great way of showing that. Now, one of the things that I want to suggest here is when you do the preparation move, and indeed this is or the bolster move, when characters are spending their preparation, and this is how I use it in games, when they get ready to spend the preparation, you don't just let them spend it and get the +1 and that's it. Have them do a little flashback where they show their character either training or preparing for this moment, right? Or training or preparing for something that is close to this moment, and they're relying on that training or preparation. Those little flashback moments are a great opportunity to show the character in action, to give the character a little bit more texture. Yeah,
I think that's a great way of doing it, and I don't think that it even goes against the text of the move.
Oh no, not at all. I think it's implied, maybe, or at least that's how I play.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Okay, so that's one thing. Already, straight away, you can see we're getting a little bit of that Blades in the Dark style sort of planning montage stuff going on, right? The other thing I want to suggest for this bolster move as a way of making it more interesting is actually a hack. Now, this is not in the rules, but I do think that there's a fun way you can hack it to get this more urban fantasy, heisty, mission-oriented flavor. And that is this. Instead of giving them a +1 to the roll right now, you actually let them spend the preparation to do a non-modified roll in the past. Okay? So, for example, in the here and now, they are trying to infiltrate a keep of some sort, and there is a guard guarding a door that they need to get past. What I would have them do, this is my hack, you let them spend the preparation to do a flashback where we see them getting that guard drunk the night before, right? And you might even have them roll charisma or something, right? To see if they succeed. And then you go back to the present day, retcon it slightly, and then, the guard didn't show up to work because you got him too drunk, right? That's another interesting way of using this, I think.
That is interesting. Is there a benefit to doing it that way? I mean, from a narrative standpoint, it's more interesting. But
that's strictly it. Yeah.
Yeah. Are the implications that if it went poorly for them in the past, at least they're aware of it now, and that's the benefit?
Well, I think you figure it out, right? I mean, if they got a miss on that roll that takes place in the past, maybe maybe the problem's worse than they thought, right? Maybe there's something unexpected on the other side of that door.
Okay.
My thinking here with this is you don't have to do much to make Dungeon World have a Blades in the Dark feel. That's kind of really it.
Right. No, you don't.
And so that's all I wanted to say. I just think the Bolster move it's a simple move on paper. But just kind of tweaking it and thinking about it in a slightly different way, you can get a lot of outcome that kind of leads you. You can get an outcome that is more in this sort of mission-oriented style.
Yeah, it makes it feel like your people are more competent in what they are doing and that they didn't just stumble on the situation. They have planned and prepared for it. I totally get that.
Yeah, and indeed, I mean, and this is not even like entirely out of step with how Dungeon World works anyway, because the Thief has a couple of moves. I think they have one move called Heist, in fact, that is very similar to this. You get to ask a bunch of questions about a location, and it's as if the Thief has been like scouting and preparing beforehand. And so like he asks these questions, and that you get lots of like cool information that lets them react to things and be more efficient as they approach the problem.
Yeah, I like any of those moves that kind of show that the characters have lives that go beyond like when we're sitting down to play at the table. I think it's always good to see that.
That's all I got though.
Cool. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is what here is useful or valuable to me.
Okay, so we have 2 more entries from our Keepers of the Gauntlet writing contest. I have chosen one, a monster by Greg Gelder called The Night of Mums. The Night of Mums. On the morning of the 3rd week, after the first leaves turn, the people of the Eastern Valley hold the harvest of the mums. The bright, rainbow-colored flowers are gathered in large canvas bags and brought to the festival scaffold. There, the spry and able ascend and descend the wire night form on patterned silks, weaving flowers as they go. When the light wanes, the evening's drinking of mead and other honeyed liquors begin. When, at last, the valley people retire for the evening, the Night of Mums awakens. Until the first snowfall, this unsleeping golem cannot die and protects the valley from all who would come to take the final harvests. The same wire lattice is used each year. So that's a little intro. Here is the stats. The Night of Mums is solitary, huge, a construct, and magical. His weapon is a honeyed blade, which does D10 plus 3. It is reach and has forceful. The Knight of Mums has 20 hit points, 4 armor. Its instinct is to protect the innocent. His moves produce a cloud of choking pollen, heal or reanimate through water and sun, shape and twist the wind.
That's a really good one.
Really fun. Yeah, it's good. I like it. It's very Wicker Man, right? It's like a beneficent Wicker Man thing. Really into that. And he's just really painted a lovely picture. You can imagine just a whole cool set piece, surrounding this, right? This whole idea. Maybe even something like, a little mini adventure where some evil sorcerer gets control of the Night of Mums and starts causing havoc during the festival or something like that, right?
Yeah. I just kind of like the idea, like, not even necessarily of fighting the Night of Mums, but just seeing it, like, moving around or seeing the festival when they make it, like, it'd just be cool.
Yeah, I agree completely. Another reason why I chose this one, why it kind of stuck out to me, is in my games, I actually have a recurring NPC called the Night of Mums, which is where the Keeper of the Gauntlet title came from in the first place. And my Night of Mums is really different from this. My Night of Mums is more of a Dark Souls-esque wandering crazy person, basically, right? Like he's kind of he's a character who's sort of strangely affected by the cosmos, and whenever you encounter him, he's a perplexing, frustrating, fascinating individual. Very, very different from this Night of Mums, but I think that's why this contest is so fun to me. When I made a lot of these Keeper of the Gauntlet titles, I had certain things in mind, but it's kind of fun to see how other people interpret just those words,
Yeah, definitely. Because your Knight of Mums is just like a knight who has a mum emblazoned on his armor, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, by appearance anyways. So it's very different, which is cool. Mine is similarly inspiring, in that it's something I would not have thought of in any way. And mine is the Keeper of the Blood of Lursiss, and that's by James Hardy. And the text goes thus. The legendary druid Lursiss Concerned that his war to ensure the primacy of the wild and destroy the empires of men would take longer than one lifetime, concocted a way to continue his war beyond his years. He did not choose the path of undeath, but instead constructed grim altars deep within the woods wherein he performed a ritual to bind his will to his bloodline, allowing his soul to possess his progeny upon his death. He needed to repeat the process with each new body, so Lursiss' grim altars can be found in several dark corners of the world, and while his ritual is believed to have died with him, his altars can be used by those seeking the reverse effect, separation from one's forebearers. The ritual of unbirth is decidedly unpleasant. It begins with a bath of raw eggs, and gets far worse before it gets better. When finished, the ritual leader, who may or may not be the target doing this to himself, rolls plus charisma. On a hit, the target is mystically severed from his ancestors, free from any ancestral curses or boons, any strange legacies, or even mundane responsibilities. All memories anyone has that connects him to his family is altered, save only the memories of the ritualist. And, on a 10+, all written records that had mentioned the target's connection to his family are also altered. The target becomes someone with no origin or past.
That's pretty fascinating, huh?
Yeah, like, when I read this, I was like, wow. And I had to read it again. I was like, how did I get to this from Blood of Lursiss? And it's like, you can do anything with these title names to incorporate them and make crazy things. I never would have thought of this, but I'm really into it. I like this idea.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really evocative. It's a sort of, I like the idea of like the unbirth. It's just kind of a neat idea. And here's another example of Lursiss is a character in my games that I run. Well, a character of myth. They never appear on screen. In my games, Lursiss is a Naga, an ancient Naga, and the various body parts of Lursiss are like quest items.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah, so the blood of Lursiss, the skin of Lursiss, and so forth. So yeah, again, really, really cool to see like other people's interpretations of things that to me are very, very, common and mean a certain thing. But I really like it though. That's been kind of a fun thing about this contest. Yeah.
That's some of the joy of like, I just give you a title and you spin it off into whatever you think that it could possibly be.
So listeners, our contest is ongoing. You have until March 1st to send us an entry. You can send your entries either to gauntletpodcast@gmail.com, or you can post them as comments on our G+ posts for this show. A reminder, you will look at the Keepers of the Gauntlet titles and create either a magic item, a custom move, or a monster inspired by those Keeper titles. 250 words is the word limit, and you can submit as many as you wish. The winner will get $25 and be invited to co-host an episode of the show, and then up to 2 runners-up will get $25 each.
Awesome. Let's move on to our next segment.
Hey everyone, Jason here. I want to tell you about Codex. Codex is the Gauntlet's monthly RPG fanzine. It features original story games and LARPs, hacks and supplements for existing games, and loads of original artwork. You can get access to Codex by making a $4 or higher pledge to the Gauntlet Patreon. The issue available for January 2018 patrons is called Codex Lies, and it's all about deception. It features 5 ruinous artifacts, a supplement for Dungeon World, Liars and Bastards All, an original story game about fantasy con artists, HGMO Sherlock, a Baker Street reskin of the popular game Hot Guys Making Out, Lies of the Child Kingdom, an OSR adventure and winner of our recent writing contest, and 36 Scoundrels, a miscellany of scum and villainy. Your $4 pledge in January not only gets you a PDF copy of Codex Lies, but your name will also be included in the back of future issues of Codex, along with your special Keeper of the Gauntlet title, so long as your pledge is active. Support everything we do in the Gauntlet, including this podcast, and get access to Codex Lies by going to patreon.com/gauntlet.
Our next segment is What is About to Happen. Listeners, this is the ongoing adventure of Saint Evelyn the White, or the Mad Saint. And when we last saw Saint Evelyn, she was in the town of Felbit. She had confronted a priest, or the priest had confronted her, who is a man named Hamish. He wears Spartan clothes and comes from a very unmarked kind of church that worships Oron and Lunon and doesn't seem to have any other particular distinction beyond not having a distinction, which is telling in itself. St. Evelyn had freed a creature, one of the Stitched, which the priest had killed, and then after their confrontation, the priest had stormed off, and villagers had rushed out to meet the returning army as it came through the gate. Decimated army at best. Most of them seem to be bringing in more dead than they bring living. And they are gathering in the town square, and there are cries of joy and cries of anguish as husbands and wives are reunited. Families are discovered to be destroyed. And St. Evelyn was left near the ruined body of the Stitched as a man with no legs pulled himself out and began eating the remains. St. Evelyn, what do you do?
He's eating the remains of the Stitched?
Yes.
Huh. I have rations in my pack. I will kneel down and offer him one. I say, sir, there's no need for you to consume this creature. Here, take this. And I pull out a pack of rations.
And he turns and looks at you with hollow eyes that are very suspicious of your intention. But he quickly enough snatches the ration away from you. What are your rations?
Oh gosh, I don't think I've ever been asked such a thing or thought about such a thing. I think it's probably mostly hardtack bread. I think that's something that, these lands are blighted. And if you're able to get your hands on some kind of wheat flour, you better make sure whatever you make from it will last a long time. And so I think I've got like a piece of hardtack bread, a few strips of dried meat, and maybe even like a little tiny wax packet of seasoning.
He looks at it like it's a feast. He hasn't seen so much food in months. And it looks like he hasn't seen so much food in months. You can see his ribs are exposed. He has just kind of a torn, dirty shirt. And it looks like he was living in the alley that he just pulled himself from. And he's not really conversing. He's more just looking at the food and almost as if it's a mirage, touching it, and then just putting some of the hardtack into his mouth, which you notice has only a few teeth left.
I'm watching him eat, and I kneel down next to him, and I say, "Sir, there will not always be food like this. I fear I won't always be around to ease your hunger. Tell me, do you live a hard life? Do you sometimes feel like the pain of this world, of your existence, is more than you can handle?"
Well, it's been months since I've had proper food. Last time I ate proper.
And he starts to cry a little bit.
Last time I ate proper is when I sold my legs.
That is a desperate action. It would seem to indicate that you have a strong, intense desire to keep on living. Is this a fair assessment?
I don't live for myself anymore.
Oh? Is there someone else?
My wife. I have to keep her.
What is your trade? What do you do, sir?
I can't do anything anymore. I just rely on others. I beg. I find what I can.
And he looks down at the crunched up body that had been trampled by the horses.
I eat whatever I can.
I stand up, and my feelings right now are pretty all over the place. They call me the Mad Saint because I travel from community to community, easing the suffering of victims of terrible wars. I believe that my role in serving the gods is to free people from bondage, and one of the most terrible bondages is, well, it's the bonds of life, when living is so painful and arduous. Here is someone who is doing his best to hold on, and I have to respect that. I stand up, and I'm going to go try to find lodging.
And as you're walking away, you feel a slight tug on your cloak, at the bottom of your cloak. The man has grabbed hold of it.
Please, please. I know it is too much to ask, but perhaps you could have pity and give some for my wife.
I do. I remove another one of my rations, press it into his hands. I even have a couple of coin.
And he takes it and he stuffs it into a satchel that he has around his neck.
Bless you. Bless you.
And he begins to cry again, but he has not enough moisture to actually produce tears.
I make sure he knows where I'll be staying.
And he thanks Oron and Lunan in your name, and as you walk away, he grabs the remains of that creature and tightens the satchel around his neck and drags it off into the alley. We'll wrap it up there. That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Discern Realities is a production of the Gauntlet. We can be found on our G Plus community. Just go to the community section of G Plus and search for the Gauntlet. You will find us there. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. Quick note, listeners, if you have any comments on the show, don't use the commenting system on the website or on your podcast delivery mechanism, because I miss those often. The notifications for those systems are not great. And so if you could instead just contact us on G+, that would be fabulous. We're also on Twitter for that, at Gauntlet RPG. And if you'd like to support us on Patreon, it's patreon.com/Gauntlet.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show.